In a land where winter reigned supreme, the village of Frostvale stood proudly, nestled between towering snow-capped mountains. The village was small, but it was full of warmth, happiness, and love. Unlike many other places dominated by the cold, Frostvale was special because it held a secret so magical that only the villagers knew, and they cherished it deeply. For generations, they guarded this secret, passing it down from one family to the next like a priceless heirloom. The heart of the village's joy and magic was the annual Winter Festival, an event celebrated with dazzling lights, laughter, and the creation of intricate ice sculptures. But not just any sculptures. The centerpiece was always the glowing ice sculpture, radiant work of art that shimmered in hues of blue, white, and gold, illuminating the village square. It was no ordinary sculpture, for it was said to have been touched by the magic of a magic fairy whose dandelions floated in the wind, bringing enchantment to the coldest of days. Chapter 1. The village and its traditions. Frostvale's people were a close-knit community, united by their love of family, tradition, and the deep bond they shared with the land. Every year, in the deepest part of winter, they gathered for the Winter Festival. Houses were decorated with twinkling lights, and the streets were filled with the sound of children laughing, their voices carrying over the snow-covered roofs. At the center of the festival stood the Ice Garden, a place where artists, young and old, sculpted ice into all manner of fantastical shapes. Each year, the most talented ice sculptor in the village was given the honor of creating the glowing ice sculpture. It was more than just a piece of art. It was the symbol of Frostvale's unity, hope, and love, illuminated by the magic of a fairy said to have once visited the village long ago. Among the village's talented sculptors was a young boy named Finn. He was known for his keen eye and steady hands, even though he was only 12. Finn lived with his parents, Tilda and Ivan, and his little sister, Anya, in a cozy stone cottage at the edge of the village. His family had always been involved in the Winter Festival, with his father creating ice carvings for as long as Finn could remember. But this year was different. This year, Finn's father had passed the family's sculpting tools to him. "Are you ready, Finn?" asked his father, his face soft with pride but also concern. "The Winter Festival begins soon. This year, it's your turn to shine." Finn gulped and looked at the delicate chisel his father handed him. The tool was old, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use, and yet it seemed to hum with the energy of countless sculptures it had helped create. "I'm ready, Papa," Finn replied, though his hands trembled slightly. "Remember, it's not just about creating a beautiful sculpture," his father continued. "You must feel the ice. Let it speak to you." Finn nodded, but in his heart he worried. Could he really create something worthy of the glowing ice sculpture? Every year, the sculpture seemed more magical than the last, and everyone in the village marveled at its beauty. Now, the responsibility of creating it had fallen on his shoulders. His little sister, Anya, tugged at his sleeve, her bright blue eyes sparkling with excitement. "Finn, are you going to make something amazing? Can I help?" she asked eagerly. Finn smiled down at her, though he felt the weight of expectation heavy in his chest. "Maybe you can give me ideas," he said, ruffling her hair. Anya was only 6, but she had a boundless imagination. She often spoke of fairies and magical creatures, and though Finn didn't always believe her stories, he loved hearing them. Tilda, their mother, stepped into the room, her hands dusted with flour from the bread she was baking for the festival. "Don't forget to take a break and eat something," she said warmly, placing a hand on Finn's shoulder. "You'll need your strength." Finn nodded, though he barely touched the bread as he prepared for the big day. Outside, snowflakes began to fall, lightly dusting the village. The square was already bustling with people setting up stalls, hanging decorations, and preparing for the festival to begin. But Finn's mind was focused entirely on the task ahead. Chapter 2. A special encounter. The next morning, Finn woke before dawn. The village was still quiet, and the snow blanketed everything in a peaceful white glow. His parents were still asleep, but Anya, ever the early riser, was already dressed in her winter coat, her face pressed against the frosted window. "Look, Finn," she said, her breath fogging up the glass. The snow is perfect for sculpting today. Finn smiled as he pulled on his boots and coat. You always say it's perfect. Anya giggled. That's because it is. Together, they stepped out into the crisp morning air. Finn had decided to start working on his sculpture early, away from the distractions of the festival preparations. He walked to the ice garden, carrying his father's chisel and a block of clear ice he had stored in their shed the night before. As he set up his tools and studied the block of ice, he heard a soft rustling sound nearby. Turning, he saw something that made him blink in surprise. Floating just a few feet away was a dandelion seed, glowing softly in the early morning light. Finn watched in amazement as the dandelion drifted toward him, its glow brightening. It wasn't possible. It was winter. Dandelions didn't bloom in the snow. And yet here it was, floating gracefully, as though it had been carried by an invisible breeze. Anya gasped, her eyes wide. It's a magic dandelion, she whispered. Finn, it's from the fairy. Finn opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, the dandelion floated closer and closer until it gently landed on the block of ice. The ice shimmered for a moment, and Finn could have sworn he saw something move inside it, an image, like a vision, deep within the ice. His heart raced as he stared at it, trying to understand what he was seeing. Suddenly, there was a soft tinkling sound, like the chime of a tiny bell. And then, from behind a snow-covered tree, a figure emerged, a figure so small and delicate that it looked like something from one of Anya's stories. It was a fairy. Chapter 3. The magic of the fairy. The fairy was no taller than a foot, with wings that shimmered like ice crystals and hair as white as the snow. She wore a gown made of silvery frost, and as she fluttered closer, the air around her sparkled with magic. Finn and Anya stared in awe, hardly able to believe their eyes. Greetings, young ones, the fairy said in a voice that was soft but clear, like the sound of wind through the trees. I am Lyria, guardian of the winter dandelions. Anya's face lit up with excitement. I knew it! I knew there was a magic fairy, she exclaimed, her small hands clapping together. Finn, still in shock, managed to find his voice. Are you the one who blesses the glowing ice sculpture every year? He asked hesitantly. Lyria nodded, her wings fluttering gently as she landed gracefully on the block of ice. Yes, it is my magic that gives the sculpture its glow. But the magic only works if the heart of the sculptor is true and their love for their family and village is pure. Finn felt his heart skip a beat. He had always heard stories of the magic fairy, but he had never truly believed them until now. I'm supposed to create the glowing ice sculpture this year, he said quietly. But I don't know if I can make something worthy of your magic. The fairy smiled kindly at him. Do not doubt yourself, young Finn. The magic comes not from the perfection of the sculpture, but from the love you put into it. Your heart is full of love for your family, your village, and this land. That is what makes the sculpture glow. Finn looked down at the ice, still unsure. But I don't even know what to make. I've been trying to think of something special, something that will amaze everyone. Lyria fluttered her wings and looked at him with wise eyes. The most special things are often those that come from the heart, not the mind. Think of what makes you happiest, what you love most, and let that guide you. Finn thought for a moment. What made him happiest? He glanced at Anya, who was still staring at the fairy with wide-eyed wonder, and then he thought of his parents, of the village that had raised him, of the winter festival that had always been a symbol of warmth and unity in the coldest of seasons. Suddenly, an idea began to form in his mind. Chapter 4. Sculpting the Magic. Finn's hands moved quickly but carefully as he began to chisel the block of ice. He could feel something inside him guiding each movement, something more than just skill. It was as though the ice was speaking to him, just as his father had said. As he worked, Anya stayed by his side, watching with fascination. Lyria, the fairy, fluttered around them, her magic filling the air with a soft, glowing light. Slowly but surely, the sculpture began to take shape. Finn's hands carved out delicate curves and intricate patterns, and soon, a figure emerged from the ice, a figure of a family, huddled together beneath a tree, their faces lit with joy. The tree above them was adorned with dandelions, each one glowing softly, just like the one that had led the fairy to him. The sculpture wasn't grand or imposing, but it was full of love. It captured the essence of what the winter festival truly meant: the warmth of family, the joy of togetherness, and the magic that came from the heart. When Finn finally stepped back to look at his work, he felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. It wasn't perfect, but it was exactly what it needed to be. Lyria fluttered closer, her eyes sparkling with approval. "You have done well, young Finn. Your sculpture is filled with the magic of love, and that is what will make it glow." With a wave of her hand, a soft light began to emanate from the sculpture. The figures of the family glowed with a warm, golden hue, while the dandelions sparkled like stars. It was as if the sculpture was alive with magic, and Finn could feel it in every part of his being. Anya clapped her hands in delight. "It's beautiful, Finn. It's the best one ever." Finn smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fairy's magic. "Thank you," he said, looking at Lyria. "I couldn't have done it without your help." Lyria smiled and nodded. "Remember, Finn, the greatest magic comes from within. As long as you carry that love in your heart, you will always create something beautiful." With that, the fairy fluttered her wings and began to rise into the air. "I must go now, but my magic will always be with you and your family, and with the village of Frostvale." Finn and Anya watched as Lyria disappeared into the morning light, leaving behind a trail of sparkling dandelion seeds that floated gently on the breeze. Chapter 5. The Festival. When the winter festival began later that day, the village gathered in the square, eager to see the glowing ice sculpture. As the sun set and the lights of the festival twinkled in the snow, Finn unveiled his creation. Gasps of awe filled the air as the villagers saw the glowing family, the delicate dandelions, and the tree that seemed to radiate warmth and magic. It wasn't the grandest sculpture they had ever seen, but it was the most beautiful because it captured the heart of what the village stood for. Tears filled Tilda's eyes as she looked at her son's creation. "It's perfect, Finn," she whispered, pulling him into a hug. "Your father would be so proud." Finn smiled, feeling the love of his family surrounding him. For the first time, he truly understood the magic of the glowing ice sculpture. It wasn't just the work of the fairy, but the work of every heart that had ever lived in Frostvale. As the night wore on and the festival reached its peak, the glowing sculpture stood at the center of the village, a beacon of love, family, and unity. And as Finn stood with his family, watching the lights of the festival dance across the snow, he knew that this was only the beginning of many more winters filled with magic and joy, for in the village of Frostvale, the magic of the fairy's dandelions would live on, carried in the hearts of those who believed in the power of love. Epilogue. The legacy of the glowing sculpture years passed, and Finn grew into a master sculptor, just like his father before him. Each winter, he created the glowing ice sculpture for the winter festival, and each year, it brought the village together in joy and celebration. But the real magic of the sculpture was not in its glowing light or its intricate design. It was in the love that filled the hearts of those who created it, those who gathered to celebrate it, and those who passed its story down from one generation to the next. And though the fairy Lyria was never seen again, her magic remained in the village of Frostvale, as long as the people continued to believe in the power of love, family, and the glowing dandelions that danced on the winter breeze.